Okay, welcome back. Hopefully, you had a nice lunch. I have the privilege of introducing our final formal lecture for the 76th Annual Conference of United Israel World Union. He is a personal friend of mine. I'll read his formal bio. Barry Page is an internationally acclaimed speaker and the author of several books, including The Historical Moses Found. It's a nice title. The Covenant of Nebo. And then the next book, this was recently published, called The Authors of the Torah Come Alive, a new generation of Hebrew biblical scholarship. So you already know it's going to be one of those biblical views of the Torah, right? So he has addressed audiences in Australia, in England, in India, in the United States, and obviously Israel. He is a student of the Hebrew Bible, the Christian Scriptures, and the Quran. He has pursued an academic study of the Bible in Australia, in Mount Scopus Memorial College in the U.S., at the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York, and in Israel at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. Barry was the president of the Movement for Egalitarian Judaism in Israel. He's worked as a coordinator of the Council of Ethiopian Jewish Priests, the president of, he's also worked as an editor for Interdisciplinary Bible Scholar, devoting himself to revised biblical scholarship, primarily as it relates to a revised biblical chronology based upon archaeological advancements. So just so you know, Barry pursues the study of the Torah from an academic perspective, and he'll be presenting some of those thoughts with us today. Welcome, Barry.
Thank you, Ross. It's a pleasure to be here in North Carolina at this conference. I found a great affinity for United Israel over a period of now 2 years because I have the type of approach that this organization has. And I hope they're proud of me. Maybe they'll be more proud of me after the end of this talk, or the opposite.
Wait, now Barry, you have to stay by the mic.
Oh, sorry, I got to stay by the mic. I'm used to.
You
I can go.
carry it with you. Just
Okay.
make sure we can hear.
I've heard a lot of people have given discussions as what brought them here or brought them to where they are at the moment. So I felt after hearing and being here for a while that I should write a brief statement of what brought me here. I'd first like to explain what brought me to United Israel. I was brought up a nice Orthodox Jewish home. Isn't that sweet? And went for 12 years to a nice Orthodox Jewish school. And there I studied in detail the Hebrew Bible and was taught that Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Bible and given a very strong biblical fundamentalist education, Hebrew biblical fundamentalist education. Most of my friends and family had the same education as I had. They became atheists or Buddhists, which is an embarrassment in Australia, but I was determined to understand the problems that do exist in the composition of the Chumash, the Pentateuch, or the first 5 books of Moses. The Orthodox rabbi at the synagogue, when we came with a group of us to ask questions, exploded in anger and threw my friends and myself out of his office. And I left with the documentary hypothesis and the academic biblical scholars to cope with. I was not capable of being a biblical fundamentalist. You'll soon see why. At about the age of 20, I had come to the conclusion that Moses wrote only the book of Deuteronomy, and Ross summed up yesterday the kind of reasons for me reaching these conclusions. Yet another conclusion I reached was that we must be pluralistic and respect all those who search the ancient way as expressed in the Hebrew Bible. You might have a different outlook to me or the same outlook, but whatever happens, we're all going to be buddies. The Bible is a difficult document. Normally, if you go and buy a book, it's written by one person, it's got one mentality, one message to it. You read the book, you finish it, no problems. Not so with the Hebrew Bible. There are three sources, in my opinion, that wrote the Hebrew Bible, and they had different outlooks. They contradicted each other, and you'll hear a little more about this as we go along. For every scholar, every 10 scholars, there are 11 different biblical opinions, and the Holy Ghost is not one of them. Sorry for that. United Israel has for me been an ideal place for me to meet and interact with many people who agree with me and many people who disagree. What is called the Hebrew Bible has existed, what is called the 5 books of Moses has existed for around 2,000 years and was adopted after the Talmudic writers expressed the view that Moses wrote the 5 books. Before 2,000 years, no one made the statement that the 5 books were written by Moses. And as Ross explained, there's only Deuteronomy, which made a clear, explicit statement that Moses was the author, and the vast book of Deuteronomy, from chapter 1 to chapter 30, is written mostly in the first person. The last chapters of the book of Deuteronomy, 31 to 34, was written by the same type of editor or compiler that wrote the earlier 4 books of the Pentateuch. Now I'd like to come, after that introduction, and you know what I'm about, I'd like to come to my talk, which I prepared. Today I'm going to focus on Moses, the founding monotheistic process of the people Israel, and the one personal, loving Creator God, who made a covenant with Israel before his death, the death of Moses, near Mount Nebo, on the east side of the Jordan River, some 3,500 years ago. In this covenant, God asked of Israel passionate love with all your heart, soul, and might. Isn't that a fair summary of all heart, soul, and mind? Passionate. I don't know what is, but that's what's written in Deuteronomy. And we are commanded to love God with all our heart, soul, and might. And in return, God would give to Israel a loving new home on the west side of the Jordan, the promised land. The very name of God, Yud-He, Vav-He, meant passionate lover. Pause. And that is the second half of my speech, explaining that the name of God does not mean I am that I am, or I will be, or what I will be, but means passionate lover. Moses wrote this covenant of Nebo in a book. It's called Sefer Torah, that is found in the book of Deuteronomy that we have in our possession today. We are very lucky to have the book of Deuteronomy. The Levites transmitted it very carefully for 2,000 years and made very few changes. There is editing of the book of Deuteronomy, which I'll talk about, but the actual diction of the book of Deuteronomy they kept. Even though the language was changing over a period of 500 years, which I'll talk about in a minute, the Levites transmitted Deuteronomy with the ancient archaic language. we'll be discussing the diction of the book of Deuteronomy that is archaic compared to the Tetrachute, the books of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers. I must explain I call the Tetrachute. Tetra is 4, and the 4 books I'm referring to are Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers. And the rest of the Hebrew Bible. Then we will turn to the name of God and its meaning, the diction of Moses. Moses wrote in the 22 consonant linear alphabet that was used in Egypt over 3,500 years ago. Over the last 50 years, archaeologists have found alphabets up to 3,800 years old, and 2 of them, the 22 consonant system we call Hebrew, and the 27 to 29 pictorial system, which we can call Canaanite. Both originated in Egypt and not in Phoenicia. How many people have heard that the alphabet began in Phoenicia? Look at all nodding yes. Slightly incorrect. Saying that maybe 100 years ago, one could make a statement like that. But now we have archaeological basis that the alphabets began in Egypt. And Egypt was the first Middle Eastern alphabet and not Phoenician that adopted the Egyptian system. The scholarly world are willing to allow Moses and Israel knowledge of the 22 consonant system of the 10 Commandments. You probably know everyone, inverted commas, agrees that Moses and the people of Israel received the 10 Commandments. But Moses, above that, was illiterate, according as far as writing is concerned. This is the view to this day at universities, where you'll go, or if you do go, your children do go, to study the Hebrew Bible. They will tell you that the sources of the Pentateuch were written between the 7th and 9th century BCE, some 500 years after the time of Moses. Okay? The text of Deuteronomy has a definitive style and language. The language is archaic. It is the oldest language, which might be a shock to hear, but I'll explain that to you. And it is clearly the earliest language in the Hebrew Bible. By noting 4 diachronic words, we can start to outline the development of biblical Hebrew. Now, this is a study for people who have a thorough knowledge of Hebrew and have a good concordance, a biblical concordance. That's what you need to do this analysis, and I spent so many years with a nice biblical concordance, checking all these words and finding out the development or what went on with the biblical language over a period of 500 years. In English, art thou listening, of say 500 years ago, becomes are you listening today. The same occurred in biblical Hebrew from the time of Moses till the time of David Solomon, the United Kingdom. Art thou listening? I will be using the following terms for the different variants of the Hebrew found in the Hebrew Bible. Archaic Hebrew is the term used for the wilderness settlement period Hebrew. Early biblical Hebrew was the Hebrew used during the Judges period, when literacy was generally limited to poets and prosaic scribes. Standard biblical Hebrew was the Hebrew used by poets and prosaic scribes during the United Kingdom, the time of David and Solomon, when the language stabilized, standardized, and literacy became more widespread. I have a fellow compatriot from Australia. His name is Professor Ian Young. He is also a Hebraist, an expert on Hebrew. And he presented a series of papers with the convincing argument that poetic biblical texts such as Genesis 49, Exodus 15, and Deuteronomy 32 were not written in archaic Hebrew, as some scholars had suggested. You probably remember that. The ancient Hebrew were these poems. One is the Song of the Sea, one is the Song of Deborah, and one is, I think, the Blessing of Moses. This should be noted that there were also southern and northern prosaic dialects, as discussed in the works of Gary Rensburg. There's now, he identifies a Israelian dialect, i.e. the people in the north of the country, in Israel, spoke a slightly different Hebrew to the Judeans, the people in Judah. Judah is standard biblical Hebrew, and what was spoken in the north of the country, he calls Israelian, or Israelian, I hope I pronounce it properly. In the analysis today, we'll be focusing on the changes that are found in the development from archaic prosaic Hebrew to standard prosaic Hebrew. In the Hebrew Bible, prosaic and poetic Hebrew are presented in the final compilation made side by side as it exists in what we have. If you read the Bible, you'll find both prosaic and poetic Hebrew. The prophets generally used prosaic dialect in their writings. A diachronic factor in the Hebrew Bible was a word that changed over time, like, for example, thou became you in English. There are 4 basic diachronic factors, and I'll be outlining them that are relevant to the dating of the text of the Code of Deuteronomy. The first one is nunation. We're now going to get into Hebrew. The Hebrew words are normally like tishmarun, which means preserve yourself, and it's got a nun at the end. And later on, they used tishmaru without the nun. You can go over, you have a concordance, so you can go over all these nunations, all these issue of the nun being dropped over the biblical period. So if you come to a text which has got full of nuns at the end of the word, you've got a text which is very early. Tishmarun became Tishmaru, Yarichun, to extend, became Yarichu. These are 2 examples of the final nun being dropped from the text. There are around 200 examples of the extraneous nun in the present Hebrew Bible. Many scholars, such as Kaufman, Noguchi, and Decane, see the degree of nunation as a diachronic factor. The Code of Deuteronomy has 55 instances of nunation and 60 instances of the relevant verb without the nun. This can be called 91% nunation. A similar analysis for the Tetratuch puts nun at 27% for the popular cult writers and 2.5% for the Aaronite cult writers. The popular cult and Aaronite sacrificial cults were the cults that were initiated during the Judges period after the death of Moses and Joshua. That's a topic in itself. You know, people ask me, you say Moses wrote only the book of Deuteronomy. Who wrote the other 4 books? Anyone was thinking of answering that question? It's a relevant question. But these are the people that wrote the other 4 books, the leaders of the sacrificial cults that existed in Judges period Israel. Now we're going on to the second topic, which is very fascinating, gender differentiation. In archaic Hebrew, the word who was used for she, which is wrong. He should have been used for she, and who is archaic. The third person feminine. A later stage, the normative he for she was adopted. Similarly, in archaic Hebrew, boy was used for girl. Na'ar referred to a girl. You got your Bible there? Are you familiar with what I'm talking about? Okay. Then this was replaced by the normative na'ara for girl. Bible scholars such as Rensburg and Green have noted this diachronic issue. Rensburg, in his article, A New Look at the Pentateuchal Hu, reaches the following conclusion. It was the earliest Hebrew that employed the epicene hu, i.e., they used hu for he and she. If you were a girl, you were called the same as a boy, in short. When the Israelites spread out during the centuries after the conquest, especially during the time of David and Solomon, the normative Canaanite usage was adopted. Hu was restricted to masculine, and he was adopted for feminine. And that's, if anyone who learns Hebrew today learns that a boy is hu and a girl is he. It wasn't that way for archaic Hebrew. And the book of Deuteronomy does not have this gender differentiation. In both the popular and Aaronite cuts, there's a mixture of hu and he for third person feminine, indicating that some of these texts were quite early, probably during the time of David and Solomon. The lack of general gender differentiation in the Code of Deuteronomy relating to the above issues clearly makes the language of Deuteronomy archaic. We're getting the message. Deuteronomy's got an archaic language which did not exist after the death of Moses and definitely didn't exist at the time of Solomon and David. Now we have a beautiful example. Anochi. Anyone know Anochi means I. But, hi man. Anochi is also an Egyptian word, Ankh. And we can suggest that the word Anochi came from Egypt, that the Israelites left Egypt and were calling I, which is first person, Ankh. And when they got to Canaan, they used the Canaanite word, which is Ani. So we have a diachronic change from Anochi to Ani. And again, if you read a text and it's all full of Anochi, you think someone just came out of Egypt. And that's absolutely true. What we find, if you look at the statistics on this, is very explicit. Deuteronomy has a 100% usage of Anochi, 30 times, and no usage of Ani, clear cut. And in the first millennia, there's a clear transition from Anochi to Ani, and the popular and the first millennia prophets were using generally Ani. Amos, Hosea, Jeremiah still had some usage of Anochi. The 100% usage of Anochi in the Code of Deuteronomy precludes any suggestions that there were two different meanings or usages for Anochi and Ani. Once again, Deuteronomy has a linguistic indication of being archaic. Little by little, I hope we're accumulating. The more you hear examples you get, the stronger the argument goes. The fourth argument is on the word for heart. Who would like to tell me the Hebrew word for heart? Well, that's true and not true. No, not the levav. Levav is the archaic word for heart. And they dropped the second bet, which is a ver, and were left in the normative Hebrew with lev. And we in Israel, of course, use the word lev for heart. But Deuteronomy, I'll give you the exact figure here. Where are we? Here we are. Deuteronomy uses 42 times levav. and four times lev. This example of a 90% usage of levav for heart also supports the thesis that the Code of Deuteronomy was written in archaic biblical Hebrew. These four diachronic factors discussed above can be referred to as basic to the dating of Deuteronomy. They involve examples of archaic words that in each case have statistical support for them. There are, however, other supporting examples with a limited number, so we can't, statistically argue. In each case, it could be suggested for the thesis that the diction of the Code of Deuteronomy is archaic. The first one is the one my friend Ross mentioned yesterday. Moses led Israel from Egypt and came to a place which he called, where's the place where the Ten Commandments was given? Horeb. Sorry, I'm going to be playing games, sorry. He went to a place which he called Horeb. And Horeb can be best translated as the wilderness. He did not know the name Sinai, as this was a name which was, the place was called much later. In the Deuteronomy Code, the word Horeb is used 9 times and Sinai not at all. And I like to refer to the discussion with Ross. There is an example which Sinai is used. It is Deuteronomy, I think 31 or 32, and it's after, you know the exact name? 33, okay. It's after the Code of Deuteronomy. It's in that little section between 31 and 34, which is written not by Moses, but by other people. We've always, hope I've defined, is that the Code of Deuteronomy is chapter 1 to 30. So it is a clear-cut example. And if you want the figures about the first 4 books of the Bible, I can't remember the exact figure now, there's about 26 usages of Sinai, and with a few usages of Horeb in the earlier 4 books of the Hebrew Bible. You can check these things up in a concordance. Let's go further. This is fascinating. The Code of Deuteronomy uses the word af for anger. Af means nose in Hebrew. And the word af means that in the archaic language, that your snorting nose means that you're angry, or something to that extent. And later writers used zam and kas to express anger, with hema to express wrath. Another lovely example is the word for sympathy. Tachos et einecha is the word used in Deuteronomy, to sense with your eyes. To sense with your eyes is allegedly to sympathize, where later Hebrew uses rachamim, which is the word we're used to using today. Again, if you had a text there with 4 or 5 times written tachos einecha, it's an archaic text. And we keep going on. Another word which Ross used in one service was hesed. And the word hesed can best be translated as kindness. There's a better word. Do you have a better word for Ross than hesed? I know it can be taken to mean all types of things, but I like to call it kindness. It is used frequently in standard biblical Hebrew and in the Hebrew of the Pentateuch and by first millennia BCE prophets. The word is not used in the Code of Deuteronomy, but on 3 occasions in the edited additions to the Code, the word hesed is used. And the next word I do dedicate to Ross. Ruach. Ruach is spirit or wind. And I heard Ross I listened to Ross almost religiously every Saturday morning. Not this, I didn't. But on one Saturday morning, he says, Ruach Elohim is in this page, this book, Samuel, Judges, Kings. I'm going, what about Deuteronomy? And I said, this is strange. So I quickly called out my concordance, and there's no Ross. There's no Ross. So there's no Ruach in Deuteronomy. Full stop. Ross, I hope, is in Deuteronomy. But there's no Ruach. Moses didn't know the word Ruach. And it was used extensively in later periods. So that word, and this is interesting. The word neshama. Okay, you know what neshama means. Anyone would like to translate neshama for me? Soul, soul, soul. You don't like that? Okay, well, anyway, okay, but yeah, but they've translated it soul. But the message I'm trying to make is that there's no soul in Deuteronomy. Now, any book which is full of soul, love, which I'm going to come to in the next few minutes, you'd expect to have used frequently the word soul. But it does not appear in the Deuteronomy Code. Both these words were used commonly in later normative Hebrew. Deuteronomy uses the word nephesh, body, instead of soul. You'll find that in Deuteronomy. You'd expect to see the word soul used, but you'll find the word nephesh is used because he didn't have the word soul. Soul, S-O-U-L. Because his language of Moses in the Deuteronomy was archaic. Okay, and now the final example is the Shema. In Deuteronomy 6:5, nephesh is used for soul for the lack of the word neshama in the diction of the writer. This refers to the Shema paragraph, a text that is incredible in more ways than one. The opening sentence should be translation. You shall love God, the Lord your God, with all your heart, with all your body, because he uses nephesh, and with all your very, me'od. Me'od, all your very. That doesn't quite make sense. Me'od means very. And the interpreters, the translators, translated it into might. There are words for might. Hazak, Oz, Koach. But Deuteronomy knew of Hazak, but didn't use it. He decided to use the word very. He had a word in his mind, which we'll never know what it was, and he used me'od as the third attribute or thing required of you. English translators interpreted the verse as all your heart, soul, and your might, but this is not written in Hebrew. The author of the Shema did not have a word for soul, as this was the later neshama. So he used the word nephesh, and also he did not have a word which he's looking for high intensity, and he used the word ma'od instead. Moses was simply lost for words with his ancient Hebrew vocabulary. Did anyone ever think this is possible? Okay. To sum up, Deuteronomy's archaic Hebrew diction, lack of gender differentiation, that's mixing up male and female. The nun ending, which is dropped, levav for heart, Horeb for Mount Sinai, af for anger, tachosot anecha for sympathy. These words were inherently archaic, and each one changed over time of the biblical period, say from 1500 BC, the time of Moses, to 500 BCE. The nun ending was dropped for most to the third person future verbs. Anochi, which is Egyptian, became ani, mostly became ani, which is Canaanite. Who became he, for a girl became what it should be he, and na'ar for girl became na'ara. Levav for heart is used mostly as lev in later Hebrew, in standard biblical Hebrew. And similarly, af became Zam and Kas, and Tahos and Necha became Rachamim. We conclude that the first four biblical books were written after the archaic Deuteronomy. Okay, and they are written in early or standard biblical Hebrew. But the most incredible one is Jeremiah. We all know that Jeremiah was inspired by the book of Deuteronomy. He read the book of Deuteronomy. He knew quotes from the book of Deuteronomy. But his diction was not the diction of the book of Deuteronomy. Now, I've been a naughty boy. I've had a handout here, and I've given them all out. Could I just have the handout? I'll just read the figures for you can see that all this, I've been talking for about 15 minutes, and it's all summed up on this piece of paper here. And in Jeremiah, let me go through it very quickly. Deuteronomy has 91% nun ending. Jeremiah has 2.4%, i.e. the nuns have been dropped. First person Anochi, Deuteronomy has 100%. Jeremiah has 33%. Lack of gender differentiation, Deuteronomy is 100%. Jeremiah has 2.4%. And lastly, Levav, Deuteronomy has 90% and Jeremiah has 14%. Jeremiah was speaking standard biblical Hebrew and writing it. Deuteronomy was writing in archaic biblical Hebrew. And that is the message which I wanted to convey to you. These documents you have summarizes some of the linguistic changes from the time of Moses, Deuteronomy, through the Pentateuch, written during the Judges period, and on to standard biblical Hebrew that was used from the first millennium BC onwards, including the book of Deuteronomy, the book of Jeremiah. The linguistic analysis should be taken with other indicators, such as the composition of the Deuteronomy code in the first person, with Moses claiming to be the author of the code, and the reference in Deuteronomy only to Levite priests. This is the point I'm adding on to the wonderful series of points which Ross gave. Deuteronomy knows only of Levite priests. No Aaronite sacrificial priests and no Tzadokite sacrificial priests. The only time when everybody, inverted commas, of the priests was Levite was in the wilderness at the time of Moses. All these points add together to give a convincing argument that Deuteronomy was the first book and the only book written by Moses. And over the last 5 or 10 years, happily, many academics are agreeing with me. I'm only being sarcastic. I had this idea about 50 years ago. A couple of years ago, Professor David Gillard from the University of Beersheba wrote Deuteronomy, the first Torah. If anyone could summarize my speech today, that's it. He agrees with all this material I've been presenting. And secondly, understanding Deuteronomy on its own terms by Itamar Kislev, professor from the University of Haifa. These two gentlemen have now came out agreeing with the idea that Deuteronomy was the first document. And I must tell you that 95 academic professors will tell you that Deuteronomy still was written in the 7th century, i.e. 500 years approximately after Moses. So we have what's called, in my cover of my book, a new generation of Bible scholarship. If these Bible scholars can now consider Deuteronomy as being written by Moses, we are getting a new generation of thought that has not existed. But we now come, I think, to maybe the climax for many people, the name of God. An integral part of religious revelation to Moses was the name of God, who had this loving link with Israel. In Exodus 3:14, the text explains the name of God. Moses says to God, "If they ask me what my name is, what shall I say?" God replied, "I am who I am." You probably know this by heart. This, I think, was at the burning bush. Yeah. Then he added, "What shall I tell the Israelites? I am has sent you. In Exodus 34, some 30 paragraphs later, it's stated that God is a zealous God and his name is zealous or passionate. And by the way, I don't like people who use the word jealous as the translation of kana, which I've heard repeatedly. You're probably used to it. The Christian preacher saying that the Old Testament says that God is a jealous God. It's not an accurate translation of the Hebrew. The best translation is a zealous God. And it's important because what's God going to be jealous about? The other gods? There aren't any other gods in the belief of biblical Hebrew. Okay, so we're now left with a major problem as who are we to believe? Exodus 3, which says I am, or Exodus 34, which says zealous. One of them has to be right, one of them has to be wrong. There are major problems which I'm suggesting, and I suggest the reason. Firstly, the root name of God is He Vav He. Here we have it down on the sheet, which means passion, and Yud He Vav He means passionate one or passionate lover. In the Hebrew language, there are roots that revolve around the theme of love. You've probably heard of ahav is a normative love. Ava is an alternative, and hava is another variation on the theme of love and desire. He Vav He can best be translated as passionate love. The word Yud He Vav He is a third person noun, the passionate one or the passionate lover. These conclusions concerning the meaning of the name of God were presented in an article written by a noted Hebrew linguist, Shlomo Goiten, from the Hebrew University in 1956. Mainstream Bibles stuck with the I am meaning, even though it is not and was not grammatically correct. The alternative passionate lover meaning is not only more in line with Hebrew grammar, it adds to the romantic element of the historic called Moses. Deuteronomy 6 speaks of loving God with all your heart, soul, and mind. This was a clear expression of passionate love. The name of God means passionate love. When He Vav He was used as the name of God, biblical writers, including Moses, stopped using the He Vav He root for general usage. This was done out of respect for the divine name. It was only in ancient Arabic languages, they continued to use the word He Vav He as passionate, and Shlomo Goiten was learned in both Hebrew and ancient Arabic. So it's not enough to know Hebrew well, you have to know Arabic well. And this particular professor understood what was going on, where the whole bulk of professors continued with the He Vav Yud He, meaning passionate, when it means I am that I am. But that's not what's written. It's not written He Yud He, it's written He Vav He. For the religious world had become very attached to the I am translation of the name of God and devoutly stood by every word in the book of Exodus. It was not a pleasant assertion to suggest that Exodus misrepresented the name of God and the accurate meaning would be something else. In summary, Moses, the Code of Deuteronomy, professed the love of God, mentioned 9 times without wilderness animal sacrifices. While Genesis, Exodus, and Leviticus, who wrote after the death of Moses during the Judges period, professed animal sacrifices without mentioning the name, the love of God at all. I'm looking at my friend Ross straight in the eyes because he checked me out on this, on the concordance. You have a concordance? Find the love of God in the first 4 books of the Hebrew Bible. It does not exist. Few shocks we've had today, haven't we? Okay. The covenant made between God, Israel, and Moses, made in the plains of Moab, near Mount Nebo, where Moses died, featured the love of God and tzedek. There's a Beatles song, is all you need is love. That's not the motto of the Hebrew Bible, and I don't think it's the motto of United Israel. All you need is love and tzedek. Tzedek means righteousness. You don't, and by the way, this is probably a sensitive thing in the Christian world, where they got carried away with having only the love of God, and that's all. One needs tzedek, and by tzedek, the covenant means decent moral behavior that included justice and charity, including loyal love of your partner, parents, and children. It included the Shabbat, the 3 pilgrimage harvest festivals, and the roles of the prophet, the Levite, and the king. I could go on for another 10 minutes going all the points in the book of Deuteronomy. Dr. Tabor, in his book, lists all one by one, every single point of Torah that's in the book of Deuteronomy, and he follows it up with the points, extra points, in the book of Leviticus. Leviticus adds on other points of law, and I don't want to say anything negative against it, and I would like to concentrate for 1 minute on that. How do we relate to the Tetratuch? The book of Deuteronomy is God in search of man, which we, Heschel, Abraham Joshua Heschel, prophecy is God in search of man. That's Deuteronomy. The first 4 books are man in search of God. We're all man in search of God. The Psalms are man in search of God. The Proverbs are man in search of God. And many of the texts in the first 4 books of the Tetratuch are very reverent, God-fearing works. Okay? You don't have to be a prophet to express yourself in a God-fearing way. And the writers of the first 4 books of the Pentateuch express themselves in a very reverent, God-fearing way, but they also express themselves intensely in the field of animal sacrifice. But that is a separate issue. The book of Numbers, the book of Leviticus, and the second half of the book of Exodus is one long dissertation in animal sacrifice. This is very nice. The practical side of passionate love for God, I must stress, means creating a home and a community with an abundance of happiness, music, singing, and even dancing. This is what love of God. How do you express it? You sit in the chair saying, I love God. I hope you do sit in the chair and say love of God. And in a minute I will make a suggestion on this topic. But if you create a wonderful home which is happy, musical, loving, dancing, your children, I don't see many children here, but I can see a few over there, will feel at home with the idea of love of God. And the Deuteronomic Shema, the second line, it says, you shinantim lebincha. You should install this wonderful message to your children. And it's not enough just to impress yourself saying, I'm a pious person. You have to impress your relatives and children. And how you do that is not compelling them to do things, but creating a wonderful, happy, musical, joyous home. Not to talk about sin, original sin, life after death, you name it, heaven, hell, and so on. This is what Moses thought. Moses didn't know of dualism with all these elements of otherworldly aspects. And you, as people now in the world of the Hebrew Bible, should concentrate your home on being happy and musical and joyous so that you can be happy and joyous and your kids can be happy and joyous and want to associate with biblical monotheism. That is the word I prefer to use, not being Jewish, to be a good biblical monotheist, irrespective if you come from Judah. What's the name of it? Ephraim, Manasseh, Gad, Asher, Benjamin. The aim is to be a good biblical monotheist. Ushinantim levanecha. You should teach it diligently to your children. I spoke about the meaning of the name of God, and I'd like to add another interesting meaning of the word enthusiastic. Don't answer. What do you think is the root meaning of the word enthusiastic? That's, yeah, you're right. Almost right, yeah. En means, what's the word I used? En means one, and God is theo, like a one with God, or if you like, God in us. And that is what you should try in your life to be enthusiastic. And when I see the Facebook and all these Facebook writings, I see people who are very enthusiastic. They have trouble keeping themselves under control with the level of enthusiastic that they express on the internet. And that reminds me of this one guy I hoped would come tonight, which couldn't come here, and that's Timothy. Timothy, I think, is somewhere else and couldn't come, but he is probably the most enthusiastic person I've ever seen in the way he handles, Timothy Kiger. You'll sit on there, and one after one, I'm happy if I can produce one statement on the internet. He goes there in batches of 6, one after the other, all of them fascinating. Okay. I'm a balanced man. On the negative side, the ultimate aim of the Torah of Moses was to have the newly formed nation of Israel settle in their new homeland, loving God and living happily with the people around them. On the negative side, the Torah of Moses, as expressed in the book of Deuteronomy, included in its detailed code the accepted Middle Eastern discrimination against women that existed 3,500 years ago. A single girl was expected to marry the man that raped her after the male raper had paid the appropriate money to the father of the girl. Deuteronomy 22, if you'd like to read it. There's another example. If a man died without children, his widow was expected to marry her late husband's brother and to try and give birth to an offspring to carry on the name of her dead husband. We're now in Deuteronomy 25. This discrimination against women needs reform in our time, but this does not negate in any way the covenant of Nebo. The other legal codes in the Pentateuch, Exodus 21 to 23, written by the popular cult, and Leviticus 19 to 21, written by the Aaronite priestly cult, includes a very positive approach, worthy of our respect and clearly aiming at a just society. Other ancient nations such as Babylon and Isin, Lipit Ishtar, the code of Lipit Ishtar, has many elements that are very moral, as well do modern academics. We have no right to say that the modern academics are more or less ethical than the Torah. The Torah is very ethical, and the modern academics, if you studied ethics according to the professors, and that is very well organized and moral. The Eastern religions, such as Buddhism, Taoism, and Hinduism, have a good deal of justice and morality, but do not turn to a personal loving God. One respected, even feared the gods, but one did not love the God. What is unique is the expression of love of the one personal creator God as expressed in the covenant Nebo, found in the book of Deuteronomy and followed by the Torah prophets. To those people who have bought my book, one of the books lists all the examples where the Torah prophets express the love of God. Okay? And when they were apart, all this mentality which I hear described as Deuteronomy was followed by the Torah prophets, Hosea, Amos, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and the Isaiah. It is appropriate now for a quote from Deuteronomy. You've heard enough from me. I would like to read from you Deuteronomy 10, chapter 10, verse 12, and it really sums up what I've been saying. And now, Israel, what does God ask of you? To remain in awe of God and to follow all his paths and to love him, worshipping God with all your heart and all your soul. You should observe God's commandments and his decrees that I'm declaring to you today so that all will be well with you. The heavens and the heavens of the heavens, the earth and everything in it, all belong to God. Yet it was with your ancestors that God developed a closeness. He loved them. This is two, remember I mentioned this is two of the word examples of love out of the 9 in Deuteronomy. Where are we? He loved them and chose them, their descendants, from all the other nations, as is the situation today. Remove the barriers from your hearts and do not remain stubborn anymore. Yahweh, your God, is the judge of judges, master of masters, the great, mighty, and awesome God that does not give special consideration or accept bribes. He brings justice to the orphans and widows and loves the foreigners, since you were once foreigners in the land of Egypt. Remain in awe of God, worship him, and swear in his name. He is your praise and your God. He is the one that did you all these great and awesome deeds that you saw with your eyes. The very name of the one personal creator God means passionate lover. It all comes together when we recognize the name of God as passionate lover and cleave to the loving covenant made between God and Israel before his death. There were other Israelite covenants, such as the covenant at Horeb or Sinai, made around 40 years before Moses' death at Nebo. It was a magnificent introduction to the Israelites that had just escaped from Egypt. But Moses, before his death, climaxed the relationship between God and Israel. There's no mention of love of God, in the 10 Commandments, with a covenant that focused on both love of God and tzedek, righteous justice and charity. Mr. Chairman, you're Mr. Chairman? I would like to conclude my discussion on Moses and passionate love with a prayer that I say every morning when I wake up, and it is very appropriate today. Let me find my prayer. And this prayer has a section on it. Written by Rita Janow. Anyone recognize the name Rita Janow? She's one of our Facebook people who lives in Jerusalem. She regularly goes to the Western Wall and puts papers in the wall for people who requested of her. Upon arising, Modeh Ani, a traditional prayer on arising. I gratefully thank you, O living and personal King, for you have returned my soul that is within me, with compassionate, abundant in your faithfulness. The beginning of wisdom is the awe of God that brings understanding to all our practices. Your praise endures forever. Blessed is the name of your glorious kingdom for all eternity. A morning prayer written by Rita Janow. God, please enlighten my heart, enlighten my mouth with truth, inflame my heart with love, inspire my will with courage, enrich my heart with service, pardon what I have seen, sanctify what I am, and order what I will be. Before saying the Shema, written by myself, as I'm about to say the Shema, I remember that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob also loved you, and that was this love resurfaced at the time of Moses. Before the death of Moses, a covenant of love was made between God and Israel at Mount Nebo. As I'm saying the Shema, I remember the exodus from Egypt, when God moved nature with signs and wonders out of love for the founding nation of Israel to free them from slavery and onto a successful home. As I'm about to say the Shema, I remember the Shabbat, a day that I can set aside my earthly affairs to love God and rejoice with the Creator, fully expressing my feelings for God, the people around me, and all creation. As I'm about to say the Shema, I remember that your name, Yahweh, means passionate lover, and we humans have a covenant of love with our Creator. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and might. Let these matters that I command you this today be on your heart. Teach them earnestly to your children and speak of them while you sit in your home, while you walk on the way, while you retire, and when you arise. Bind them as a sign on your hands and let them symbols between your eyes. Write them on the doorpost of your houses and of your gates. Toda Rabbah. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So Russ, where's Russ? Come on up. If any of you want to read Shlomo Gurtin's article, it's in Vedas Testamentum. We can send you the link. How would we do that? Just put it on Facebook, maybe? Yeah, we'll upload it on Facebook. I'm not competent to judge its adequacy, but I see two grammarians sitting here. No, you're not listening to me. What did I just say? I see two grammarians here, and you interrupt me when I'm recognizing you. Oh, you thought I meant Tyler, right? I'm also thinking of Yaakov, who studied Hebrew intensely. So no, we don't take a break at 3, right? Or do we? Do you remember? Just 1 second, Barry. We're just saying.
I think we can take a break and then we come back, but we could.
No, we'll do a few questions, but the point is there a break or do we go right to the... It doesn't matter. It's not written in stone. Yeah, you'll have to come up here, though, because I think the audience would be quite interested, if you don't mind, Nehemiah. And Yaakov, if you have anything to say as well. So.
Yeah, we start at 3:30 with the panel.
All right. Does anybody else have questions? This won't be short. Well, let's let her go first.
Barry, I would love a copy of your prayer. Is there any way? It's not.
Yeah, we can post. Yeah. The first part, Modeh Ani Lefaneka, right? In the prayer book. Yeah. Okay.
just write down your name here and I'll send it back.
Or Ross can post it. We'll post it, yeah.
Can I make one statement? It's an awesome way to wake up in the morning.
Okay, Nehemiah? Did you have a question?
I have a list of questions. So, and I won't make a speech. I'll actually have actual questions, which maybe Ross can respond to as well. And I first will just say I ask these questions unapologetically as a biblical fundamentalist who believes every word of the Bible, of the Tanakh. Okay, so let's start with my favorite book, the book of Nehemiah, chapter 8, because you made the statement that, I mean, you might want to take notes here. You made the statement that nobody before 2,000 years ago said that Moses wrote the Torah. That's something we just invented 2,000 years ago. Is that right?
Did Nehemiah, I'm asking, did Nehemiah say, I know the quote you're talking about, did he say that the 5 books were written by Moses?
No, but they read from the Torah. Verse 1, it says, and they gathered all the people as one, etc. Vayomru le'Ezra Sofer, and Ezra the scribe, he brought out the Sefer Torat Moshe, the book of the Torah of Moses. And there's no question from this context, they're quoting from Leviticus 23:40. Read the rest of the chapter. Later in verse 15, they're paraphrasing Leviticus 23:40 as kakatuv, that which is written in this book of the Torah of Moses, which they also call the book of the Torah of Elohim. So that's just one example. Well, actually, I'll let you respond to that, maybe.
Okay, yeah, I can tell you, Ezra came there with 5 books. I don't think there's any doubt about that. In the time of Nehemiah. Well, it was
Not 2,000 years ago, it's 2,500 years ago.
okay. I'm referring to. I understand. 2,500 years. They came with 5 books. You know, that's the scrolls that we know. When I think was it in 5 scrolls or 1 scroll? That's an interesting question.
Sounds like it was in one scroll.
Okay. And if that was, I was wondering if any book.
It also sounds like that they read the entire Torah between morning and around the middle of the day.
I don't know if they read the whole thing,
But
Leviticus 23:40 was included in it.
No, but
Okay.
so just to be fair though, I understand the.
No, because later in the chapter they spent 8 days reading from the Torah.
Right.
Or that,
But so they're.
I accept that, by the way. It
Okay.
could be.
Oh, okay. So, all right. So you've now stipulated that by the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, they could have been wrong, but they believed Genesis through Deuteronomy was the Torah of Moses. Meaning, if Genesis through Numbers, as you're saying, is a big lie, it's a lie that was believed by the time of Ezra and Nehemiah. You agree with that?
I'll agree with that.
I don't think I have to ask anything further than that. So.
I think the use of the language is incorrect, this big lie. I could say early Christians believed that Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John were the gospel of Jesus Christ. Of course they did. That doesn't mean that you don't have development, you don't have authorship, you don't have layers. It's just, it's a straw man to say, if it's a big lie. In other words, you can't have any sources. Moses sat down, he got it from heaven, he had no records. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's not what he...
agree.
Yeah. No, it's casting it in such a way that it is fundamentalist. It's that the Holy Spirit dictated to Moses all the ages that Jodel went on, because Moses surely couldn't remember Methuselah's, how long he lived, right? So the Holy Spirit did that.
Yeah, no, I agree 100% that the Holy Spirit, I don't think I'd call it the Holy Spirit, but that God, when it says, Vayidaber Yehovah el Moshe le'emor, and Yehovah spoke to Moses saying, I don't believe it was a popular cult making up a story, or that the priests concocted a story. I think Yehovah actually spoke to Moses. And we can disagree on that, that's okay. But, okay. But you don't think Yehovah actually spoke to Moses? So it is a lie, right?
Absolutely. If you're talking about the book of okay, sorry, no. If you're talking about the book of Leviticus or book of Numbers, and when God says to Moses, "Go kill the 4 animals," and after that 6 birds and two cows and all that, that's a lie. I'm sorry.
Okay. Next question is, and I don't want to be up here giving a speech. This wasn't, So there are a series of things in Deuteronomy which make absolutely no sense without the context of Leviticus specifically. I would argue maybe even without the context of Exodus. And just to read you one, I don't even have only have my phone here. I'm just off the top of my head. So yeah, it's no, I got it here on the phone. Okay. No, I'm going to quote from Deuteronomy. So, for example, and by the way, I just what you said about Deuteronomy 22, I think that's a mischaracterization that a woman's required to marry her rapist. Just have a look at Deuteronomy. I'll read you Deuteronomy 22:26, which talks about a raped woman, and it says the girl has done nothing wrong. There's no sin of death in the girl, which you think means a boy, by the way, right? But that's a question of orthography, I think, that you're mixing with. But that's a different question. For as a man rises up against his fellow and murders him, so is this matter. So no, that's not the whole thing. There's more to it than that. No, we don't have time to discuss the whole thing. But I think you have to read the whole thing within that context. No. It doesn't say rapist. You said rapist. I think we just established rape is tantamount to murder in the Bible, in Deuteronomy. No. It doesn't say violated in the Hebrew. That's a different question. Deuteronomy 16. No, it wasn't 16 I wanted. 24, hold on. I'd like to see you celebrate the feasts of the Bible based entirely on Deuteronomy. There's no Yom Kippur, there's no day of shouting, of Yom Teruah. There's no first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread as a day of not work, because that's only in Leviticus and Exodus, but there is a seventh day. I think it makes absolutely no sense without the context earlier in the Torah. And then Deuteronomy 24, and I've got a million examples, but I'm just going to bring this last one, and then I'm going to hand it off to you. Deuteronomy 12 has to be read in the context of Leviticus 17, or it makes no sense. You agree with that one. And then Deuteronomy 24 here, or let's say 24? No, 22 I wanted. 24, where it talks about the leprosy, and it says, beware, verse 8, and maybe this was added by later scribes, you believe, I don't know. Was it? It says, beware of or be careful of the plague of leprosy, etc., to do as the Levitical priests, as I have commanded them, you shall diligently do. Well, we know where he commanded them. It's in Leviticus. Okay, anyway, I got more, but I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, that would be.
I mean, the name thing is only based on his discounting of Exodus and saying it doesn't fit Hebrew grammar, but then we have to go to Arabic. So which principle specifically in Hebrew grammar does it not fit? Let's start with that.
Hey, Vav, hey, is nothing to do with I am or I will be.
Okay, so you tell me in biblical Hebrew, what is the imperative form of to be? It's in the Tanakh is heve, and then hoveh is the present form as well. So this is what we call an ayin vav yud verb, and the vav and yud switch places, like in chava, which admittedly you'll say was written by a priest in 700 BC. That's fine, okay. I don't agree with that. Oh, when?
For Rendsburg. The academics, which you're probably familiar with, said that all these sources were written down in the 7th BC, or 6th or 8th, whereas Rendsburg is a different idea, and he makes all the texts were compiled during the United Kingdom.
So in the Hebrew of 1000 BC, as you understand it, Chava, which is the name of Eve, is from the word chaya, chet yud he. So that's a vav and he switch, right? And so, no, well, Yehovah is a name of something, right? It's a name, and so not just the names and verbs as well. The he, the vav and the yud switch. You agree with that or no? Like, lalun, lalin is an example in biblical Hebrew. You have that in the Krikativ.
Yud he clearly means I am that I am, and Oh, I will be, sorry, I will be.
No, it's Hayahoveh together,
I will be.
right? Which is
But-
But so you're saying you're bringing Arabic and then saying, well, it doesn't fit Hebrew grammar. So
Yeah, yeah,
can
absolutely.
you acknowledge the irony of that?
No, I tell you that the hey vav hey means passionate
But
in not Arabic, and it's there in the Hebrew Bible, and it was dropped. Its usage, as I said in my talk, because it was disrespectful. Moses and other people stopped using hey vav hey as passionate lover, and they kept it for yud hey vav hey. We will have this discussion later.
Let me make one reconciling comment on the name thing. If you look at all the proposals, even among our most revered scholars of the Hebrew Bible, they make all kinds of arguments about the name and how to pronounce it. And I think Gertein's argument is one among many that it's from the verb hawa, right? Or hava. He says hawa because he's using the old, yeah, hawa. So, but it's not as though that's the only proposal. Nehemiah has worked on the verb to be, which I've found persuasive. Others have found it persuasive. But then my colleague John Reeves in the department would probably argue for for Yahweh and all of those arguments. So just so everybody's aware, this is not a finalized case, although I would say, generally speaking, the kind of work that Nehemiah has done over the years, and particularly now on the manuscripts, I find does become quite convincing to me, and that's why I use the English word Jehovah regularly. So, no, it's not a matter of discounting it. That could be a very valid commentary from a certain period as to what the word means.
So we have a lot of fun. Some of you don't have to leave until tomorrow morning. But we do have, I would really enjoy a conversation because I brought up some things as well. Mine are textual, and I think we can have a good discussion. Others can engage in that as well. We'll let him answer it. Can we let him answer it in just so we can stay on task? 3:30. Like.
What was the session to talk about UIW?
Yeah.
Can you answer standing on one leg?
Yeah. I don't know. Can you?
What?
On Leviticus.
Yeah, Moses did give a record of the leprosy laws to the Levites. I don't know if they carried it on. Apparently they didn't. But the sons of Aaron priests also got this information and they carried it on. Both of them carried on that particular law that you are referring to.
Deuteronomy 24, whatever verse.
Yeah, it refers to Moses,
Is referring to a set of leprosy laws.
which appears in Leviticus. I know.
So that part of Leviticus was written by Moses.
No, it was written by the priests who Moses gave those laws to. Okay, that's what it says, doesn't it? He gave the laws to the priests, and they were meant to transmit it, and they did, and they wrote it in the book of Leviticus. It's indeed possible that the Levites wrote also such a law.
That part dictated by the Holy Spirit.
No comment.
So we are. No, you're not done. No, we do have some things to talk about, really. But we're done for now. We're going to take a break, and we're going to go do whatever you need to do. We'd like you to be back at, let's make it 3:30, just like the schedule says. And it's sort of right back here. It's sort of you'll see it on the schedule, sort of a going forward in United Israel and some things that we want to talk about in that sense. And then after that, we are free for the evening. And I think a lot of people have a lot of questions. We've covered a lot of ground. So take a break. Come back at 3:30.
As president of UIW, I want to say something here. I hope everyone understands, just like the multiple opinions on the name, both scholarly and professional as well as unprofessional and all sorts of other characterizations, that we actually might be the only organization that kind of flaunts complete freedom of opinion on all these things. We're sort of like the U.S. Constitution or the Declaration, let's say. Jefferson was wise enough to say life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, but then not to define it any further. And so David Horowitz said, if you order your life around the fundamental teachings of the Hebrew Bible without explaining, I would say David, I knew him real well, was not trained as a scholar at all. He's a correspondent, would totally agree with Nehemiah, and was very much of a fundamentalist, our founder. Not to say that's right, but the point is many churches have statements about the verbal, plenary inspiration of the Bible and then define it as Genesis to Revelation, usually without the Apocrypha and so forth. And we don't do that, and we don't do it on Christology, we don't do it on eschatology, we don't do it on how to keep the Sabbath or how to keep any of the festivals, but somehow we get along, don't we? And many people, I think, as a whole, believe in some sort of observance, meaning they're not disregarding these things, but they're making decisions about how to, quote, keep them or honor them, or it would be similar to honoring your parents or any of the other commandments. What would be involved in that? There can be different views. So just to make that point, because some of you are new here and you might think, well, what is the position? You had somebody get up and say something one way and another said something another way. So there you go. Okay.